Welcome to Eye on America. I'm Michelle Miller. Today we share impactful stories of Americans all across the country serving one another. We'll go inside a Connecticut school finding creative ways to lower absences and bring students back. And we head to Richmond, Virginia to spotlight one woman's deeply personal mission to reclaim a piece of history lost to time. First, we visit a community determined to change a legacy of lingering segregation. Adriana Diaz travels to Louisville, Kentucky to see how neighbors are trying to bridge the racial divide.
9th Street in Louisville is where the divide happens. West is mostly black.
I grew up as far west as you can go.
East, mostly white.
I was more on the east side, right?
Sherry Bryant Hamilton and Angie McCorkle Buckler grew up on opposite sides of 9th, but they've been coming to the symbolic street, to the Fraser History Museum, to create a bridge.
If we don't talk about it, we don't learn about it.
Tension was high.
They're attending packed panel discussions about race relations in Louisville, from policing to busing. Though the city's more diverse than ever, segregation has proven stubborn, compounded by years of systemic racism. What do you say to people who think that there's too much discussion about race?
I don't know where they're living.
May I have your blindfold, please?
Yeah.
The panels are organized by Rachel Platt, a former news anchor running community engagement for the museum.
They're tough conversations. Not everybody's in for them. Not everybody agrees that a museum should be having them. You have to really be committed to this.
We want to go to May 7th, 1968.
This panel was about the Black Six. 5 men and 1 woman, Bryant Hamilton's mother, arrested in 1968 after a white police officer beat a black man.
That history is not so long ago. You think something happened 50 years ago, 55 years ago, but it could have happened yesterday.
In 2020, Breonna Taylor's killing became a painful reminder of that past.
I've heard people say, well, but you weren't part of slavery, you know, that's been gone for years. Well, it's these kinds of incidents, the toll and the effect it can have on the families, long lasting for years to come. So we have to understand that in order to try and meet people where they are, I think.
People are too complacent and they don't realize that we're all in this together. We're gonna sink or swim together.
A community trying to change its future by understanding its past.
We now meet a group called Team Democracy that's hoping to unite Americans on a national scale by recommitting to our country's core principles. Catherine Herridge sat down with 2 former Army generals to share what they say is the first step we should take to repair the divisions in our society.
I actually think that this is as dangerous a time as we've seen in our lifetime.
Retired Army General Stanley McChrystal, who once led U.S. forces around the globe, including Afghanistan, sees America's current divisions as an issue of national security.
Because you see the symptoms of people who are disassociated from the legitimacy of the government. They are starting to question basic things like, was an election outcome valid?
I'm beginning to see, as Stan suggested, these fissures.
Retired Lieutenant General Doug Lute also served globally over a 4-decade career, including as U.S. ambassador to NATO.
These tiny fractures, these small fractures that, because of our international experience, we understand can widen and can divide America. It can actually present opportunities for our opponents.
It's not every day that you have 2 retired generals sit down and talk about the state of our elections. Why are you coming forward?
Our enemies would like nothing more than to find us not unified, to find us fragmented and unable to be the kind of America that they have faced before or relied on if they're allies.
I think Stan and I have seen democracies, fledgling democracies overseas, struggle to find their feet. And at least for me, I see some of those warning signs today in America.
As seasoned observers of conflict, these generals joined Team Democracy to highlight core principles.
The idea is to give every American a reminder and a commitment that safe and fair elections are fundamental to our nation and democracy.
The election was rigged, it was stolen.
Without the backing of former President Trump and his supporters, how can this work?
Well, it starts with the grassroots movement. Every American has got to step back and say, what do I really believe in about our nation? And that is that we are a democracy. What signals that the fact that I believe and participate in the elections.
The thing that unites us is that before we were supporters of President Trump or President Biden or Obama, we were Americans. We are Americans.
Fearful of America's military superiority, these generals say our adversaries use information as a weapon to mislead, confuse, and divide.
If I were an adversary of the United States, I'd want to go after two things. First would be our political unity, our ability to make unified decisions and execute things. But I'd also want to go after our legitimacy as a nation that other nations want to emulate.
From an intelligence perspective, why are Americans so divided?
When people get messages that are very direct, and often they are either intentionally or unintentionally incorrect, it changes their beliefs. And so they start to hold fundamental ideas that are contrary to facts.
It actually opens opportunities for those who would do us harm. And eventually their aim is to make us so divided that we're internally consumed, we're self-absorbed with our own problems, and we're unable to address issues overseas.
Recent CBS News polling underscores the divisions, with most Americans expecting violence after future presidential elections.
This is not the America that we've come to expect of ourselves.
I think if we look in cases where people think violence is an option or even an obligation, then we are starting to have drifted somewhere that we see in other countries far away, but has suddenly come home, and we need to pay close attention to it.
And once that drift begins, it's very difficult to reverse it. So now is the time, as a preventive measure, we need to get in front of these divides and try to cement ourselves back together.
After the break, a record number of kids are chronically absent from school these days. We'll show you how one district is taking a creative approach to getting students back in the classroom. School absences in the U.S. have doubled to more than 15 million. Meg Oliver visits a school district in Connecticut taking a creative approach.
It was a sweet surprise for these excited sixth graders at McDonough Middle School after a scavenger hunt. Ice cream sandwiches and a DJ dance party with their teachers and friends. To participate, the students had to be in school for 90% of April. This is just one of many events by the district to encourage attendance. Principal Marjorie Rice.
We've had fear factor events where staff has actually eaten insects.
Teachers are eating insects. To entice students back.
Yes.
Is it working?
It's working, yes. The kids do love the events. Our efforts have shown in our data that we're improving our chronic absenteeism, reducing that rate, improving our average daily attendance, but most importantly, students who maybe were disengaged in the beginning, we're starting to see them coming to school every day.
The U.S. Department of Education defines chronic absences as students who miss at least 15 days of school in a year. According to the organization Attendance Works, trauma, family responsibilities or home situations, health or transportation problems, poverty, housing, and food insecurity all contribute to chronic absences.
Are absences higher than ever?
Absolutely. We are having an attendance crisis as a country.
Hetty Chang is the executive director and president of Attendance Works. She says schools need to make kids feel connected and engaged, offer tutoring and mentoring, expand summer learning, and do at-home visits when kids aren't showing up.
Is it too late to take action right now before the end of this school year?
Absolutely not. It starts with that outreach. We need to make sure that we're reaching out to students and families.
That's exactly what Hartford Public Schools are also doing.
When did the home visits really ramp up?
Last week we did 15. And the week before that we did 15 as well.
Wow.
Ashley Jackson is the middle school student engagement specialist.
You're going to follow the deck in that order.
She helps put on events like the scavenger hunt, but also visits families at home when students aren't showing up to school.
How many students have you been able to re-engage?
A lot. I can't even put a number on it.
8th grader Ashley Quadra is one of the students Jackson has helped. During the pandemic, her family moved and she no longer qualified for school transportation. Jackson taught her how to take the public bus, riding the route with her.
If you didn't have that, do you think there might have been a day where you thought, oh, this is too much, this is too hard, I don't need to go to school today?
Yes.
Really?
Quadra now reaches out to students who are often absent.
What do you tell them? Why should they come back?
Because you need education to get further in life, because when you get older, you're probably going to want to have your career, and you can't make a career out of no education, because that education is going to get you far in life.
When you see your students smiling, when you see them engaged, when you see them doing these scavenger hunts, how does it make you feel?
It's impossible to put it into words. It is the best feeling in the world. It just fills me with joy. It fills me with a ton of pride and a whole lot of hope.
Building community bonds comes in many different forms. Omar Villafranca visited a Latino community in San Antonio that's getting a breath of fresh air by connecting family and culture with the great outdoors.
First timers?
Yeah.
Lisa Pacheco has never been the outdoorsy type.
Never put up a tent, never thought about sleeping in a tent.
But a recent camping trip with her kids took her a few hours from her San Antonio home and miles away from her comfort zone.
It's a good family time.
Their guide, Josie Gutierrez, first camped here at Garner State Park more than 30 years ago.
Aw, thank you.
Working with Latino Outdoors, she helps introduce more Latino families to Mother Nature.
Why don't Latinos camp more? What's the barrier that keeps more of us from doing it?
Definitely just not knowing how easy it can be. If you're new to a park,
Volunteers provide the basics, then let the families explore the land and themselves.
even the little kids knowing, oh, I can make fire, oh, I can do this.
You build confidence, so like for me, I'm ready to go by myself with my kids.
Pacheco knew her kids were all in with camping when they stayed offline.
They passed out. No tablets, no internet, no phones, and they actually stayed asleep.
And dreaming of the next family fiesta in the great outdoors.
So nice.
Coming up, we meet two military wives turned entrepreneurs. It's a riveting story in more ways than one. This is Eye on America. Two military wives created one of America's fastest growing companies, a line of handbags named for Rosie the Riveter that create work opportunities for military spouses. Here's Mark Strassman.
Well, it really all started because Cameron and I were military spouses.
Cameron Cruz and Lisa Bradley.
You have the ability to kind of sling it around your body, across your shoulder.
Army wives saluted for building a Made in America success story. Their North Carolina handbag company.
It matches really well.
Yeah. Here's why they became entrepreneurs. Like many military spouses, they say no one would hire them.
You're moving every 2 to 3 years on average, and employers see right through it.
Why hire you when you're going to leave?
Right.
So when I met Lisa, she was going through the exact same thing that I was.
It was going to be military spouses that had to make it for other military spouses.
She's making history, working for victory. In the spirit of Rosie the Riveter, the World War II icon, in 2011, they launched Our Riveter, their handbag business in Cameron's attic, on a sewing machine bought with a credit card.
You too were the original Riveters.
Yep.
We were.
But the goal from the beginning was to get other military spouses involved?
From the
Always
day one.
wanted to have a national network. We knew that somebody had to stand up and create the thing that we were searching for.
Handmade bags made of leather and canvas, durable, nothing fussy, the military way. They retail on average for a couple $100. Sewed by military spouses like Jennifer Gentry.
It was the perfect job for me.
Our Riveter tapped into remote work a decade before most of America. From home, Gentry sews from a kit of pre-cut materials, a job tailor-made for nomadic military life.
Nothing changes. I pack up my stuff, I pack up my sewing machine goes, and as soon as we get to the next duty station, I unpack it and I just change my address and keep going.
Our Riveter sales gradually grew. A few hundred bags became a few thousand. Then, in 2016, an invitation to appear on Shark Tank.
Nerve-wracking?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Terrifying.
Our Riveter is about empowering military spouses. And
Mark Cuban invested $100,000.
Mark, you have a deal.
Yes. And the publicity priceless.
I mean, we sold more handbags in one night than we did the whole previous 12 months.
And did it push our Riveter to the next level?
We have the business stretch marks to prove it.
Yep.
We're jumping in the deep end and we're going to get after it and see where it takes us.
They tell us sales jumped 1,700% the next year. In 2017, Inc. magazine named our Riveter one of America's fastest growing companies.
Could a couple of guys have pulled this off?
I don't think so. But maybe.
No comment on that one.
Gentry's one of 24 riveters in 15 states. Individual pieces they sew, this Florida factory assembles. Annual sales, about 24,000 bags, 80% of them online. Something special, heritage bags, a bag made from a family member's uniform.
So this will become this.
Correct, yeah.
You carry a piece of family history on your arm.
Absolutely.
Right?
And we will make you your own custom bag out of that material, full of your memories, kind of that history that typically ends up in the closet, in the back of the room.
A bag like this company now serving a larger purpose.
Ultimately, when you pick up an Our Riveter handbag, you're picking up an entire community of men and women, sort of cheering you on while you invest right back in them.
Each bag puts that military community on your shoulders for a change.
So you can meet the riveter to see who made your bag.
We close this week with a personal story of one woman's efforts to reclaim a piece of U.S. history. Former CBS News producer Rodney Hawkins met the woman hoping to reclaim one of the largest African-American burial grounds in the country.
From the stately buildings to the centuries-old cemeteries, history is on full display in Richmond, Virginia, except here. Beneath this highway, under this abandoned gas station and overgrown lawn, is one of the largest African-American cemeteries in the country, Shockoe Hill African Burying Ground. But you couldn't tell.
These people have been forgotten. They've been made invisible, and they're being treated as if they never existed at all.
Lenora McQueen is a genealogist who traced her great-great-great-great-grandmother's grave to this site.
No marble tells where Kitty Carey sleeps. Only a simple slab of painted pine.
Using documents like this poem from 1866.
For Kitty Carey lived and died a slave.
Over 22,000 free and enslaved African Americans were buried here, starting in 1816. This graveyard expanded to 31 acres.
When you drive past, 22,000 people are buried here.
When they drive down this street, they're driving over it. They re-extend the street in about 1883. And bones and bodies, it's in the city council records, bones and bodies are used as fill in the street and left sticking out of the ground.
That has to hurt.
It does, very much. It's appalling.
It took you years to find your ancestor. And to end that search with this?
Yes, I'm sorry. It was horribly gut-wrenching. If I didn't laugh about it, I would cry.
Next to the African burial ground sit two nationally registered cemeteries for the Jewish and white communities, officially marked and well maintained. It's a stark contrast.
This isn't by accident. The white authorities during Jim Crow segregation didn't have any interest in African American graves.
McQueen turned to Ryan Smith, history professor and author, for help.
There was also an effort to build up the history of the Confederacy. Just as the bridge behind us was being built in the late 1880s, the foundations for the Robert E. Lee Monument were being set.
How do we use history to change a nation, to make us better?
Lonnie Bunch is secretary of the Smithsonian Institution.
Why are African American burial grounds so important? Not just to African Americans, but to American history.
You can tell a great deal about a nation by what it remembers, by what it celebrates in its museums, by what it builds monuments to, and often what is neglected is African American, and especially African American cemeteries.
He is pushing for legislation to create a national registry for African American burial grounds.
I think this register could make connections, could allow people to know their history better, and to honor that history by remembering.
I know the power of these connections firsthand. 1 year ago, our efforts to restore my family's cemetery allowed researchers to identify my enslaved great-great-great-grandfather.
Despite this being a document that shows my ancestor as an asset, it still documents that he existed.
You realize that you are not isolated. You're from tradition, families, and that should give you inspiration as you live your own life.
For most of her life, she was enslaved on the Morven plantation.
Inspired by her ancestor, McQueen has been pushing for years to get recognition for the Shockoe Hill African Burying Ground, starting with a historic marker. The graveyard has been added to the State Landmarks Register.
How does it feel to come this far?
It's kind of bittersweet because I know there's still a long way to go. This place is still very much threatened.
The National Register is next on her list. Her goal is to honor her ancestor and others buried here so they may truly rest in peace.
What do you think your ancestor would say to you?
It's about time. What took you so long?
For more stories like these and live coverage of breaking news 24/7, stream us right here on CBS News. I'm Michelle Miller. Thank you for watching Eye on America.